Let's begin with oh. Let's begin with an introduction of our candidates. Representing Ward 3 is Gurbir Niger. Can you give us a wave, sir? Originally from BC, Gurbir came to the city 10 years ago for really one thing: opportunity. As a parent of two, a municipal manager, and a professional engineer, Gurbir's goal is to apply his passion, knowledge, and experience at the broadest level where he can make a positive and meaningful impact to people's lives. Calgary is in a peculiar place coming out of this pandemic, and we need the right people at the council table to move us forward and make Calgary a great place, the best place to live, work, play, and invest. That is Gurbir from Ward 3. Representing Ward 6 is Lana Bentley. Lana, give us a wave. A proud resident of Ward 6, Lana Bentley wants to put her energy, experience, and vision to work in her community. For nearly 20 years, Lana has worked tirelessly to improve the lives of Calgarians. She's worked in public healthcare for nearly a decade in child and adolescent mental health. A believer in the power of education, Lana has taught at Mount Royal University for nearly a decade, now in a senior leadership role in one of Calgary's oldest and largest social service agencies. Lana uses her skills and expertise to tackle some of the most challenging social issues in our community. That is Lana, Ward 6. Right near is Derek Williams in Ward 7, who will ask what will be my favorite question this evening, so stay tuned for that. This is Derek. Derek was is a born and raised Calgarian and has been living in Ward 7 for more than 10 years. He and his wife, Catherine, are raising their two young children in the community of Montgomery. He has over a decade of experience in hospitality management and hopes to bring a high level of service back to the constituents of Ward 7. Derek is an effective communicator who hopes to engage and amplify voices across the city to build Calgary for the future. That is Derek. And in the bustling ward of Ward 8, we have Ted Knutson. Ted is a proudly progressive advocate and candidate running for council in Ward 8, born at the Grace Hospital in Calgary. Wow, there's a relic. Born in the Grace Hospital in Calgary, Ted has lived the majority of his adult life in Ward 8. He's made his home in the Beltline, Altadore, Bankview, Marda Loop, Cliff Bungalow, and most recently Mission, where he serves as the vice president of the Cliff Bungalow Mission Community Association. Ted is a project manager and consultant for IT startups and has previously worked as an emergency medical technician, and believes his organizational team building experience and service-centered history uniquely equip him to champion the interest of all residents in Ward 8. Speaking of Ward 8, let's introduce Paul Bergman. There's a wave from Paul. Thank you. Born and raised in Calgary, Paul has spent the majority of his life living in Calgary's Ward 8. Equipped with a degree in economics and business, 20 plus years experience as a business owner, and the experience that comes with championing a number of community-centric and volunteer initiatives, Paul believes that sending more people with private sector experience into City Hall will mean our tax dollars will be managed more efficiently. As a father of two teenage boys, Paul recognizes that there is work to be done to ensure that Calgary can survive and thrive, and that it is time to vote for a better city. That is Paul, also from Ward 8. And finally, representing Ward 11, Courtney Brannigan. Courtney Brannigan is a well-known face in community leadership and has been a catalyst for change at the neighborhood level, in the tech sector, and in city planning. She is enthusiastic about innovation and actively encourages others to participate in creating their best version of Calgary. Courtney chooses to live in Calgary with her partner and 3 children. And that is Courtney Brannigan, Ward 11. And those are your candidates this evening. So let's begin. A quick flip here. Let's begin with our very first question, which comes from our Ward 3 candidate, Gurbir. And his question is: what are your thoughts on the Green Line LRT project and the most recent direction from the province in the phasing of this project? And our first response will come from Derek.
Hey guys, just want to say first off, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for putting this together, Courtney and Jen, for hosting. In regards to the question about the Green Line, honestly, disappointed would be a word that comes to mind. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see that we're going from the Green Line from Shepherd to Eau Claire. But if the goal here is to have a train line to maximize ridership and to transform transit, I think that we miss the mark if we don't make it all the way to 16th Avenue. The 301 line, which goes up and down Center Street, is one of the only cash positive lines and generates revenue for the city of Calgary, which means that people are actually using that part of transit on Center Street. So I think that the goal should have been to get to there, and I'm sad to see that we didn't get to there. And I know that the Green Line Board has commitment to managing costs and risks, but coming out of this pandemic with the price of steel 50% more than it was last year over year, it's tough to imagine that second phase, Eau Claire to 16th Avenue, becoming a reality within a reasonable timeline. I mean, I'm super happy that we didn't get it's postponed or suspended anymore, but I'm sad to see that we didn't get to go as far as we should have.
Thank you, Derek. Paul.
Thanks, Jen. I might take a bit of a different tack than Derek. I think cities, council's job is to manage risk. And I think there's a whole lot of risk in this project. It's the biggest public sector project we've ever done in Calgary. It represents a massive amount of money, whether it be, whether you call it 4 billion or 6 billion or whatever the number might be, particularly given the rising costs at this point in time. And I don't think that given the low ridership at this point in time, that there is necessarily a problem with just taking a step back and taking a deep breath to figure out what it is we really need. That South Line, unfortunately, we're not doing either line, north or south, justice at this point in time. That South Line doesn't go to the population. It gets sort of halfway there and then stops. So we're not really doing the South Line well. Under the present design, we're not really doing the North Line well. And so we're doing two half projects, and it's costing us the same amount of money as we originally envisioned. So I'm a lover of public transport. I'm a lover of those sorts of modes of transport. I can't say that I take them often, but I think it's important to have the various pieces of LRT that we've got so far and having new pieces. But I just don't think this plan is well thought out. It's underfunded. We're fighting with the province over it. And I don't think there's enough of a hurry that we need to rush into this without some really clear thinking about how we get through downtown, how we get across the river, how we get up 16th Avenue or to 16th Avenue up or 16th Street up Center Street to 16th Ave. I'm very concerned that this project could wreak real financial havoc on our city's already fragile finances.
Thank you, Paul. Courtney, and then Lana will be next.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm going to say thanks to Derek for pointing out a lot of the great points around the fact that we need to move this project forward. The Green Line will touch on the east side of Ward 11 as it moves through Corey. And I think the Green Line is a really great example that if we sit and we wait on something, we never do something. It's kind of akin to having a baby. If you always wait for the right time to have a kid, you're probably never going to have a kid. You just got to go with it. Now, does that mean that we're reckless with our spending? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that we use the first phase to learn so we can mitigate risk on future legs? Absolutely. So my priority going forward with the Green Line is to look at making sure that the interfacing with neighborhoods and getting to and from the Green Line and the assets that are going to be along that first phase. So I think of things like Crossroads Market. I think about the YMCA and the library that is in Corey. I think about, as it touches on neighborhoods, and there are populations down there waiting for that. That is what I am hearing. And that there are people who are, wanting to age in place, and they see transit as a viable option for them to connect into some of the services that they would otherwise have to take a vehicle towards. So I'm pro Green Line. I think we need to move it forward. I think it is unfortunate that we're phasing the project. As Paul said, it's underfunded. I think the way that we prove the business case that the Green Line works is by building the first leg, and then hopefully working with other orders of government to secure future funding.
Thank you, Courtney. Lana, you're up.
Thank you for the question. So in Ward 6, we're not a part of the city that geographically would be directly impacted by the Green Line. And for that matter, we actually have some great transit resources in our ward. Now, for that reason, I think that the folks in Ward 6 actually do appreciate the benefit and the far-reaching benefits of having transit. And on that basis, I do support the Green Line, and I'm happy to work with my community to make the case as why we should support an initiative that's good for the city as a whole. You know, I was at a youth conference over the weekend, a youth summit, pardon me. And one of the questions that we had to answer at that summit is, why are youth leaving Calgary? And part of what came up over and over again is that folks perceive that our city is not nearly as livable as it could be. And part of what makes a city more livable is having projects like the Green Line go through, particularly on a day like today when there's a lot of conversation about climate change. When we're talking about mass transit, the benefits go well beyond just getting from point A to point B. I think we need to look at the bigger picture. I think we need to look systemically. And so I am in support of this project.
Lana, thank you. All right, Gurbir, we'll go to Ted, and then Gurbir, this was your question, so you'll round us out.
It's going to be fitting that I'm following up Lana in that I totally agree with much of what she said. You know, we have a tendency in Calgary and you know, in general, to silo issues, to feel that transportation is over here and independent. Social issues are over here and independent. Investment and attracting talent is a separate issue. These are all interrelated, of course. And it's through projects like these that we signal to the world what our priorities are and what our plan for the future is. And having a vision, having a plan that involves a really robust metropolitan transportation system is key to attracting the investment and talent that's going to help us face a lot of the challenges that we're looking at, like the downtown tax shift, where we need to attract businesses to fill those empty office buildings. And if we ante up with an investment now, we're likely to see returns. But if we pull back, we know that austerity just does not work. And so if we pull back, we're sending a very dangerous signal to the world and to the youth that are leaving in droves, that brighter pastures lay elsewhere. So I'm all for it. And, you know, I don't even think that the phased approach to it is an indictment of it. Incremental improvement is improvement nonetheless. So let's do what we can and do more later.
Thank you, Ted. Gurbir, take it away.
Thank you, Jen. Before I begin, thanks to you for moderating, and thank you, Courtney, for arranging this great event. I really appreciate it. So thank you for that. You know, I think going last should be a good thing, but everybody said what I thought. So it's very difficult to put something different than what was said. But in my ward, Ward 3, North Central Calgary, this is a very important project. And I know the North has been fighting for this for some time. I know our current sitting councillor, Jyoti Gondak, has been a big proponent for this project and trying to get something included for phase 3. You know, the province took this project under review after committing $1.5 billion to it. I think there's a bit of politics at play there as to, you know, causing enough of a delay to miss this entire construction season. But, you know, the importance of the project is huge. And I think, you know, the fact that it is going ahead, even though, in my opinion, not in the direction that we'd like to see, that being south, I'm happy to see that it's going ahead, but I am sort of, you know, feeling that we as a North got the short end of the stick. And as some of the other candidates alluded to, you know, we know these mega projects, now it's at $5.5 billion, largest the city's ever undertaken. These things rarely ever come under budget or on budget. That's just the nature of projects like this. So, you know, just going on that precedent, and not to, you know, not to say that it can't be on budget. I do feel that it's going to be challenging to get the north leg built. And I think, you know, once it's the first leg of the Green Line is built, to get more transit funded on a municipal budget will be difficult. So that's why I feel that it's the approach to the project, you know, the phasing going south is not in the best interest of us in Ward 3, but I'm happy that the project is going ahead. So thanks for that.
That's great. And that's the first pass of our candidates this evening. How about a rapid fire question? What do you think? You ready? All right. Pen to paper. Here's my question. For as diverse as your wards are, they share something in common: great small businesses. We don't really fully understand the loss of our city's small businesses from COVID. So please name a business in your community that represents the heart of one of your communities. Bow Cycle, Bitter Sisters, Ship and Anchor, Distilled Coffee House. Okay. Lana says Faux Express. Okay, sounds great. See you there. Gerbir, did you have one? Did I miss it? Oh, he's working on it. He's got too many to choose from. It's a pretty dynamic ward he's trying to represent. Jerusalem Shawarma. Faux Express. I know, what does it say? I know they know my voice when I call to order. Oh yeah. Yeah, we all have a place like that. Like I'm now getting like, hey, are you still single? Because that's a lot of food for one. It's okay. That's my demon those are my demons. It's okay. That's not on you. That's a great answer to that question, Lana. And so let's move over to your question. So Lana's question is, can you share your perspective on how personal and community wellness is connected to a thriving economy? And the first to answer will be Ted, followed by Courtney.
Well, what a wonderful question. And it really sort of dovetails with something I was talking about with the last question. That's the interconnectivity. So right now we are facing an opioid crisis. And how we handle that is going to send signals to the world in terms of attracting talent and investment. But also it has a significant impact on our economic situation. So there's a lot of resistance to supervised consumption sites in terms of social disorder or moral issues with drug use. But when we look at it at a purely financial level, it saves a ridiculous amount of money. A single ambulance call for an overdose, cradle to grave, costs $6,900. And each and every time one of those calls is not made, that's money that remains in the provincial coffers, and that has a downstream effect on the monies that they get from us. And so it's, how can we in good conscience leave those savings on the table? We need to really maximize the benefit that we have. One of our competitive advantages in the world is that we are consistently rated in the top 5 of quality of life for cities in North America. And a big part of that is how we address the social issues and the well-being of the people that live here. And as a final note, it's a very famous saying by Gandhi that I'm going to butcher and paraphrase. But the measure of any society is how it deals with its citizens and the most vulnerable within it. And so I think that economically, morally, and otherwise, there's only one choice, and that's to prioritize the well-being of the people that live in this city.
Thank you, Ted. Over to you, Courtney.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna say to Jen, Lana, this was my favorite question of all the questions tonight. And in part, I think because it really made me reflect on the work that I've done over the past, 10 years in community building, at the neighborhood level, at the business level, but also how my own mental health and challenges have affected that and have affected my capacity to, to operate my own small business. But then when thriving, the capacity to step into community. And so I want to focus on the power of referral. So I am a connector by heart. I love and dream of connecting people to get to know each other. So when we think about, how we get our kids their first jobs, when we think about how we all just gave a referral to a small business in our neighborhood, because we are here and we are well and we are connected in community together. So I believe the more assets that we give into community building organizations, into nonprofit societies, people find themselves in community, and then they have the power to connect around a thriving economic sector, and they get job opportunities. And I witnessed this firsthand when I worked with Reinforced Alberta. That was our whole mission, was to build community, to build faster connections, to build the tech sector faster. That's what we did literally day in and day out. But we also saw people come and go, and we knew that was because of their personal mental health and wellness. And I think COVID, working from home, it was either the worst thing for you or the best thing for you. And we now get to come back and decide, what kind of communities do we want to participate in, and how do we do that thoughtfully, healthy, and we get a really great chance to restart and reboot. So that's how I would answer.
Thank you, Courtney. Derek.
Good question. Yeah. So community wellness to me means, having equal access to public green space, accessible transit, affordable housing, and an overall kind of effort to build a sense of a community together through, social programs and networks with those that live around you guys. And I'm talking about things like community gardens, parent and taught groups, community pantries, groups where you can walk with the seniors. If we build communities that take care of one another and offer opportunity on the micro level, then on the macro level, city building becomes a little bit easier. And if we hope to transform our downtown and make it thrive in the next decade, we need to make it a place where families can, and people say this all the time, they can live, work, and play, right? But there needs to be an actual community of people there to surround the small, medium, and large scale businesses that we hope to attract. If we want to achieve the vision of downtown Calgary that we have a vision that we do have for downtown Calgary. So lots of stuff going into that, I think, as well.
Thank you, Derek. We'll go to Gerbir and then Paul.
Thank you, Jen. And this is an incredible question. And thank you, Lana, for bringing this one forward. And I think that mental health and wellness is directly connected to a thriving economy. People always say that, the economy is the number one thing, and it really, is the foundation of that entire city is built on. But another huge aspect is our communities, and after they get developed and built, what do people do and how do they connect? And as Courtney kind of touched on, the pandemic has really taught many of us, and I'll speak for myself, one thing is the importance of mental health. And to be honest with you, I got nothing to complain about. But for me, seeing my mental health go up and down, kind of being, say, in isolation, not seeing people on a regular basis, really understand sort of the importance of that. And if you really want to put it in a numbers perspective, people who are connected to their community, have opportunities to recreate, socialize, congregate, are generally happier. And when you're happier, you're willing to go out and spend money and do different things. So if you really want to bring it down to a numbers and cents, that's directly connected. But again, I think if people have access to affordable transportation, have access to equal opportunity, have access to decent and well-paid jobs, they're going to be contributing members of society. And that is actually the backbone of a good economy. So to me, it's directly connected. And that's why the city, in terms of making investments, needs to also continue, and if not more, invest heavily in our social services and mental health and wellness, and continue on that momentum, because it is integral to our society.
Thank you. Over to you, Paul.
Great, thanks, Jen. And yeah, I guess I would echo a lot of the sentiments I'm hearing here about, you know, community creates, you know, healthy outcomes. That, you know, Ted's point about, you know, an indication of what we are as a society is really indicative of, indicated by how we treat our most vulnerable. I took a slightly different sort of read of this question, and when you talk about personal and community wellness and how it's connected to a thriving economy, I think sadly they're disconnected. What we saw when Calgary was really booming years ago was that there were a lot of people that were left behind. And it's tough to make sure that when the city's doing really well, that all the citizens are lifted up. And I think that's important, that we've got to remember that. So when we come out of this pandemic and we start to get into hopefully a thriving economy, we've got to remember those folks that have, you know, suffered immensely. To Gerber's point, I have no wants, if you will, during this time. I feel very fortunate. And I know there are others that are not feeling as fortunate. And I think that as we grow the economy, we've got to make sure we don't lose sight of that. I know there's a big discussion some time ago about defunding the police. And the reason I was against that was because there are about 29 different social programs that fall under Calgary Police Services. And I think that those programs would be very vulnerable if we started to really go after the police budget in any sort of way. So I think we need to continue those programs, and maybe they need to be split out and put into a different category or looked at differently. But I think it's really important to continue those supports. And there are great organizations out there that do that, whether it be social venture partners or, you know, other work that I've been lucky enough to bump up against and, you know, work with in the past. But it really is about supporting those most vulnerable, and let's not forget them when we move forward and we have a thriving economy.
Okay, Lana, this was your question. We're over to you now.
Thank you, Jen. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit here because of the heat. As it relates to this question, I think if we look back at what has brought the world economy to a place of a standstill globally, it's been a healthcare issue. And the reason that our local economy has come to a grinding halt and has been hugely disruptive hasn't been because we don't have enough business folks or people with economic backgrounds on city council. It has been a healthcare issue. And so on that basis alone, we see how critically important the idea of wellness is for societies to thrive. On the go forward, I think it's really important to recognize that there is an economic argument to be made for wellness at the individual and community level. Mental health is among the top 3 in terms of causes of short and long-term disability. So for those of you on the line tonight, other candidates who run small business, I'm sure you yourself know the disruption that is caused when your employees are struggling with addiction issues or mental health issues. Similarly, domestic violence is a huge disruption to the economy. When we want to talk about an economy that thrives, ultimately what we're talking about, by and large, is people. And we can't have a thriving economy without people who thrive. And if we want to thread that needle, we can see that $1 spent invested in early intervention and prevention programs has far greater reach than $1 invested in crisis and acute services. Having managed a psychiatric unit myself, I can tell you the exorbitant amount of money that it costs to keep one child in hospital overnight, as opposed to what that same $1,500 or $2,000 could do to support housing in the community, or playgrounds, or green spaces. All of those things that fall within the realm of municipal government can help children and families grow up in environments that are healthy. And that also builds protective factors against much of the social challenges that I just spoke of. So I think these issues go hand in hand. I think they reinforce each other. And I think if we want a thriving economy, we need people who are thriving themselves to push that forward. So I was just going to say thank you for the question. It was really good, but I realized it was my question. So I'm not going to say that, Jen.
Oh, you can still say it. You can still say it. That was the best question of the night. Good thing it came from me. I would take that victory lap all you want. All you want. That wraps up our second series. How about another rapid fire question? You ready? Okay, let's roll. Leadership is about service. And service begins with listening to your ward. So consider all the diverse communities in your ward as one and tell me, if your ward had a theme song, what would that theme song be? For those of you who are acting as participants this evening, it's probably now that I should disclose that we told candidates these questions were going to be far easier. I think we thought we told them we were going to ask them what their favorite flavor of ice cream is. So we're really, it's just really just cruelty now at this point. But think of all those diverse communities, and if they could have a theme song, what would that theme song be? And let's pay special attention to Ted and Paul here because they represent the same ward. And if they come up with the same answer, they both have to take me for an Alberta steak dinner. So stay tuned. All right, hold up your cards when you're ready, team. Gerbier says Happy by Pharrell Williams. Thank you for being a friend. The Golden Girls theme for Ward 8. Get ready or bye, bye, bye from Lana in 6. I Did It My Way by Sinatra in 7. I know the names of no songs, says Courtney with 3 children. And then something from the Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac, or Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm only giving a half point for that answer from Paul. Row, row, row your boat from Courtney. No way. Fail. Hard pass. That's okay. You're not going to get them. You're not going to get them all. That's okay. Let's move forward, and don't worry, these rapid fire questions get harder from here. Our next question comes from Derek, and as I previewed earlier, this is my favorite question of the evening. So I've popped some popcorn in advance for some really great answers to this question. Derek's question is, do you support public dollars being invested to support projects like the new event center and downtown office tower conversion? If yes, why? If no, why? And the first to answer that question will be Paul, followed by Gerbier.
Thanks, Jen. And Derek, thank you as well. This is an interesting question because on the surface, I would say no. Being a fiscal conservative, generally speaking. But when you do a little more digging into it, the tax dollars and the economic benefit that flows from these sorts of projects, I think is really important. So, with regards to specific projects, the event center downtown, there's economic benefit that flows out of that. So a lot of people say, the rich, team owners or the players who are making a lot of money. But there's a lot of economic spin-off that comes from the event center and all of the events that will be handled. I think there's 150 nights that the event center will be full. And so it's not just hockey games. It's not just concerts. There's lots of other stuff that'll take place. And that's a money generating facility. And downtown office conversions, I've had an opportunity to talk to some commercial office owners, office tower owners. And there really is the amount of money that they've put into that project through downtown redevelopment plan, that $200 million. At $45 million, my first blush was, well, it's hardly enough money to do anything. But in fact, when you talk to some of these people, it will take those office buildings that are, we'll call them C-class buildings, not the greatest buildings, and it'll allow them to move forward with getting with keeping our good quality office buildings and taking some of the lower quality buildings off and repurposing them for residential living. And for the longest time, we did focus heavily on commercial development downtown, and we forgot about developing residential. So I think those projects are worthwhile. And in fact, to that extent, another project that falls into that category is the Green Line. And so much as I'm really hesitant about the Green Line, and I said it earlier, and there's some real risk management that I'm concerned about, those projects generally can help get people to downtown and get some redevelopment happening. So, when it comes to the South Green Line, if we're going to build it, let's get it further south, get it to the populations so these people can get downtown and participate in that redevelopment. So absolutely, after some good digging, those projects generate economic dollars for the benefit of all Calgarians.
Thank you. Grubier.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's a very hot button topic because at the surface, it can appear that the city is subsidizing private industry. Well, one would have to take a look under the hood and kind of see really what these projects are, the event center in particular, is that they're catalysts. And understanding the city's revenue model in that over 50% or about 50% of its revenue comes from property taxes. And right now, with economic downturn and with the pandemic, but also with the global energy crisis and of a depressed price, we've lost about $16 billion of property value in downtown, the highest valued properties in our city, which is a big reason of the tax burden or tax offset that we're seeing on small business outside of the core. So a project like the event center, obviously this has been on the table for a long time. It's been a hot topic of discussion. I've been in the city for over 10 years and I heard about this thing when I first came here. The Saddle Dome being the oldest stadium in the NHL and stuff like that. So, I think this project, the event center in particular, will be a catalyst for Victoria Park. And I think it will it'll allow properties in its near vicinity to come to its highest and best use. We'll see development occur and property tax revenue roll in the door. And I think that's very important. The city did a financial model and it shows that the project based on their 50% contribution would break even or surpass after a period of 30 years. It's a long time, but it shows that the investment will eventually pay itself off. So, on the other aspect of the question, office tower conversion, I know in the $200 million budget part of the downtown plan that council just passed recently, $45 million of that was to incentivize office conversion. Very few developers have undertaken this because it's a very expensive venture. If you start looking at the numbers of something like this, your return on investments gets stretched out quite far to actually make a decent return at it. So for developers to begin to do it, it's very cost prohibitive given this kind of timeline and the upfront investment required to actually do it. So I do support that we are doing this. For the city, why should we be subsidizing again private industry? Well, if those buildings sit empty, there's a gaping hole in our tax base and revenue that we're not going to realize. So converting them to their highest and best use will bring people in those towers, bringing that revenue back into the door. Sorry. So for me, I fully do support these investments. I don't think 45 million is enough, but I think it's enough of a pilot to understand the benefit that we receive from making initiatives like this available to our development community.
Thank you. We'll move to Ted and then Lana.
I'm grateful to be able to answer this question because it's one with once again a little bit of complexity and nuance. There's a very general question about use of public funds to invest in projects, and I very generally am in favor of that. When it comes to the event center aspect of it, there's ROI there that is proven. Supporting an arena is less proven to pay off in the long run. And that notion of it being paid off in 30 years is a little bit suspect to me because that's pretty much the life cycle for a building like this, as far as I know. So it's less of a good investment when looked through that lens. So broadly, I want to say anywhere that there is a return on investment, absolutely, let's go for it. Office conversions, we will have a lot of people in this election saying that we need to trust the free market to make some of these things happen. But for reasons that others have already said, office conversion is very expensive. It's not a matter of just sort of hanging a mailbox by the door and away you go. Plumbing stacks and all sorts of things for the additional bathrooms and kitchens. It's onerous. And so if we want to get more people living downtown, we are going to need to nudge that along. And use of public funds has a longer term benefit here. And I think there's a real ROI. Back to the arena, though, I've got some real misgivings about how this happened. The opacity of the negotiations, the recent drive by the Calgary Sports and Entertainment Group to get the CMLC out of it in terms of project management. That has real ramifications on the final product that we're going to see. And one of the mandates of the CMLC was to ensure that placemaking was a big part of the design decision. So that's where we talk about added reasons to go down there other than just a hockey game, added businesses, added services for all groups and users. This placemaking, how can we now trust, with the CMLC forced out of the picture, how can we trust that placemaking is going to take a higher priority than more expensive corporate suites and a better locker room? I don't know that we can. And so I've got some real misgivings about that.
Thank you, Ted. Over to you, Lana.
Thank you for the question. As a city councillor, I believe we have two functions. I think number one, we need to work in the best interests of the city. And number two, I think we need to be strong advocates and stand up for the best interests of the people in our ward. In looking at the best interests of the city, the short answer, Jen, is yes. And I believe in evidence-based decision-making. I believe in decision-making that includes consulting with your community, consulting with the experts, and working within the scope of the role. I see all the benefits to spending public dollars to support these projects downtown. And I want to highlight, so too do the people of Ward 6. But this is a both-and statement. Okay, my dog is really worked up about this, as you can tell, like he's pumped up. But this is a both-and statement in the sense that the reason people are frustrated about public dollars supporting private endeavors downtown isn't because they don't appreciate the economic benefits. It's because the people of Ward 6 want to make sure that their needs are being met at the local level. We have a playground by a Calgary housing development that hasn't been fixed in 30 years. We have people up the hill in our ward. There are over 700 concerned parents who have come together and put together their own advocacy group because they have serious safety concerns about youth-on-youth crime in their community. When I called the City of Calgary Neighborhood Social Services, I found out they don't even have a community development social worker attached to their area. So when we talk about these projects, I think that two things can be true at once. Of course, we all want the city to thrive, and we appreciate the greater benefit to the city of Calgary, and I'm happy to support those initiatives. But I want to highlight that today on social media, we saw local charities having to beg for water for people who are homeless in the downtown core. As I said before, this is a both and. If we can find money for these projects because of the larger benefit that's realized to the economy, we also can't lose sight of the very real needs that are affecting Calgarians at the local level and also for the most vulnerable in the downtown core as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Courtney, and then Derek, this was your question, so we'll finish with you. Over to you, Courtney.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll be like Lana, I'll have a short answer. So yes, and then I'll go into my big answer. So I believe city building is a partnership between our for-profit or private sector, between our nonprofits, between the city and between citizens. And I believe that when the city decides to partner and take on investment into large projects, we are signaling to citizens the kind of city that we want to be. And so I believe that when the city is coming to the table, we get to have, or we should have a great say in what that looks like. So in the case of the event center, You know, as Ted said, with CLMC, a big part of that was the public placemaking. We cannot lose sight of that importance of the public placemaking. And so, especially when city dollars are involved. Also, why are we not asking for it to be the most green building in our city? These are things that we can be talking about when we do partner projects with anyone, you know, that chooses to partner with the city. I want to talk a little bit on the office tower conversion, and something that did come up and that hasn't been touched on is the off-market housing component of it. So again, where can the city partner with other nonprofit organizations to do city building and placemaking for some of our, you know, less opportune Calgarians? So yeah, in the short, I'm super in favor of the city coming to the table with investments. What I want to see is the city take a stance on what's important to them, what our values are based on some of the policy that we've already put forward. So I think about things like the walk strategy. I think about our climate action strategy. You know, I think about, you know, a biodiversity strategy, and how are we incorporating those strategies into any of these partnerships? And are we strategically choosing partners who want to be part of those leading policy decisions as well? And also want to take Calgary forward into the future and be something that is really, really remarkable.
Thank you, Courtney. All right, Derek, floor is yours.
That's awesome. No, I was surprised to hear so many, everyone's kind of on the same page when it comes to this question. I was expecting a little bit more headbutting, but I'm glad to hear that we have a lot of like-minded candidates here. And I echo a lot of the sentiments that were said before me. Typically though, I would not be in favor of public dollars being used for a private arena. I have strong reservations against that, but in our case, in our city at this time, I believe the investment is one of the most important things we could do for that Rivers district. It will completely reimagine that space for our city, and it will attract more than its fill of investment and business to our city. So I do see the business case for that, and I think that it's important to show the world who we are, who we want to be on the leading edge of that front. When it comes to the building conversions, I'm happy that the city put forward that it was $40 or $45 million for that first plan to do. I think having a plan for other private businesses to follow in their wake is important. I want to make sure that if we do allocate any more dollars towards building conversion, that it has the proper socioeconomic, what's the word I'm looking for, socioeconomic impact for that community. Like, I don't want those dollars to go to bail out, you know, a building that might have, you know, been there, raised rents, and just has not done the appropriate things to attract tenants. You know what I mean? I think that's important to make sure that it's helping the community. Those dollars are used in the community to help the community move forward and to move our city forward.
Thank you, Derek. And yes, you were remarkably on the same page. I was all excited for some brawling and it just didn't happen, but I guess I'll just be disappointed over here. How about another rapid fire question? Yes? How about an easier one this time? Yes? Okay, yeah. All righty. My own political aspirations began after Ronald Reagan's speech after the Challenger explosion. He said, "Find a challenge, meet it with joy." And that is largely how I live my life. In 3 words or less, what motivates you to work hard? They're thinking. We should have had some theme music. See effect of change from Courtney. Family, community, future from Derek. Lana says, just do it. Paul says, doing good. And then I don't know what it says underneath, Paul. You can just read it out loud if you'd like. I don't know what it says.
It says, sorry, money doesn't do it.
Ah, okay. All right. And Gerbir says to do better. And Ted says be the change. Well done, team. None of you said me. That hurts my feelings. So we'll move on to question 4. And this is Ted's question. Ted's question is, some people and groups feel the city's public engagement strategies are insufficient. What do you believe? And if you agree there's work to be done, what will you do specifically to improve our city's public engagement strategies? And we will begin with Courtney and then over to Lana. Courtney's thinking.
I was getting the question for the chat. Sorry.
Apologies. Yes, let me actually read the question one more time, just because I think it's so important. Some people and groups feel the city's public engagement strategies are insufficient, and I would argue some would use a more dynamic word than insufficient. What do you believe? And if you agree there's work to do, what will you do specifically to improve our city's public engagement strategies? Courtney, over to you, and then we'll go to Lana after that.
Yeah, thanks. It's really interesting. This actually came before committee today around capturing data around the engagement process. So I'm a huge believer in data. I think we should be doing a better job of the city of capturing data. Always the question though is like, why are we doing engagement? What is the intent of engagement? So one, being transparent with people on the intention of engagement. Is engagement to inform or is engagement to take feedback? So that's my first thing. My second thing is that people often give suggestions. Those suggestions sometimes aren't feasible. People need to know that, and they need to know the why. So I think people need to be responded to, whether it comes in a report, whether it comes, one-on-one. I think when we do engagement on projects, people need to understand why something they may have said, either was or wasn't considered. I think that's something we can do better with citizens. And I'm going to say that probably the number one thing we can do as counselors is be part of asking people what the engaged team is asking people. So council often gives direction on what needs engagement. If the administration goes away and does that, are you telling people about it? Are you using your social media? Are you using your newsletter? Are you connecting with your constituents to make sure that they're aware of the engagement is going on? So right now, the city is taking feedback on the public hearing process. So that's just one of the many things that the city is doing. So for myself as a counselor, it is something I've been doing through my campaign, is sharing those opportunities out to the people who are following me. And again, talking with people, having those one-on-one conversations on why something may or may not have been considered, but also diving back into doing really good data recording so that we understand who is being engaged, when they're being engaged, so that we can identify gaps to make sure that we are doing more holistic and comprehensive engagement. And I'm going to say that data capture should actually start with our election, that we should understand who is coming out to vote. So we should have good exit polling data.
Thank you. Lana.
Thank you. This is a really interesting question, and I hope I'm going to answer it in a way that fits to the spirit of the question. I think that part of the challenge here isn't necessarily public engagement. I think it's what City Council does after the public engagement. I think we have a major credibility issue with our City Council right now, and citizen engagement surveys are telling us that overwhelmingly, Calgarians are not impressed with their current City Council. I think there's been a lot of performative gestures made to engage the general public around issues of major significance. I think what happens after, though, is sometimes more important and meaningful than the process of collecting feedback itself. So I think as a city councillor, part of what I think we do to restore that faith and trust in these processes and in our roles and in our mandate is to restore credibility. And that means actually doing what we were set out to do as city councilors. In my travels over the last few months, I've heard a lot of feedback from folks in my community about what matters to them. And the bottom line is, it doesn't always match up with what we see being the really provocative social media issue of the day, or bigger picture issues that are more so a reflection of an individual's political ambition or political ideology than it is a reflection of where Calgarians are actually at. So I think that I totally agree with Courtney. I think better data does lead to better decisions. I also think it's really critically important for us to demonstrate that when we use that data, when we engage with the public, there needs to be something to close the loop and restore that faith in the process. And I think ultimately to restore the credibility of City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Nice and tight. Lana's committed to staying on time. I like it. Gurbir, you're up next, and then we'll move to Paul.
Thank you, Jen. Sorry, the AC is cranked so hard, my nose is starting to run. Apologies for that. It's a good question. You know, as a public sector worker and as a member of public administration, you know, you can never engage enough. I'll be very honest with you. You know, having done many projects, mostly related to planning and development, but also advertising bylaws and things like that, you can never do enough public engagement. And to do a true public engagement, you know, you have to really go to where people are and whether they work, whether they play, whether they go to school, because to get people to actually break their routine and step out of their, you know, everyday schedule to go somewhere to give you some feedback is quite difficult. Having done it, having tried it, you know, seeing those who are successful generally go to where the people are, whether, so again, I mentioned whether it be their workplace, whether it be a rec center, whether it be a grocery store, it could be anywhere. So that's why, you know, every project that we do, that we will do as city council needs a terms of reference and also needs a detailed engagement strategy, because no one project is the same. An area structure plan or a neighborhood plan is different than a bylaw, and it's different than the next project. So that's why having a one-stop shop blanket engagement doesn't really work. I think we saw that with oh my God, I forgot the name of the project. Somebody say it. My goodness. The guidebook for great communities. There it is. Sorry about the guidebook for great communities. We saw that you know, obviously there's a lack of engagement by the city on obviously in various communities where this plan would have impact. So I think that's why, you know, each community possibly may need different engagement, maybe certain people in the community, maybe certain community associations. So that's why it's we have to really understand what tools are available to us and how to best deploy them. But also one thing as well, to kind of reverse this entire thing, over engagement can be really bad as well. You may be in a very different place at the end than where you started from. And sometimes, and I've seen in my experience that you over engage and the project dies. So that's why it's a very fine line as to how we do these things. But every project that the city undertakes has its own gloves and has its own form of engagement. So thanks for the question.
And thank you for your answer. We'll move over to Paul and then Derek.
There we go. I'm off mute now. So this is certainly a hot topic at this point in time. The guidebook, Gerber, to your point, has been a real point of contention as of late. Another point of contention, and it actually gets to, I think, the next question, has to do with engagement around Richmond Green's golf course. But let's talk about engagement just on its own conceptually. And I'd say that Lana asked a very good question. You know, what is the role of a councillor? And I think the role of a councillor is to continue to be engaged with their constituents, even once they're elected. What I see happening with my experience of sitting in council meetings is there's a lot of administration recommending to council about things that should be done, and council relying maybe not backward looking at their constituents, but forward looking at what they're being presented in council chambers. And I think it ends up taking what could be some great ideas, not getting fully vetted at the community level. But somebody also mentioned this process of engagement, that maybe there can be too much. I actually have certainly Ward 8 is a very hot area for this guidebook conversation because they are inner city and it's about a lot about inner city development. But I've also bumped into people in Ward 8 who have said, enough engagement. We hire you to make the right decisions. So think about what's best for Calgary and move on. So you're right, Gerber, there is a balancing act that takes place there. And I guess from when you sum it all up, from my perspective, it's about making sure that you've got your constituents' concerns front and center when you're sitting in council, that you look at those policies that are being presented to you by administration, and you look at them through the lens of what your constituents would say about that policy. So it's a tough place to be, to always be looking backwards from your constituents' perspective, or not backwards, but from your constituents' perspective when you're being presented something by administration, because the two often might not have the same goals in mind. So, some of these, so it's a tough thing, but I think the role of a councillor ultimately is about staying engaged with their community and getting feedback on stuff as it rolls along. So, it's a tough line to walk, but it's important to do it from a constituent's perspective.
Thank you. Derek, over to you.
So I believe that we've come to a time in this information age where people expect information and access on demand. It's just, we've come to this far. We're there now. And if I am elected, I hope to bring engagement to the people like Gabir was talking about, in the form of hosting events and attending events and going to where the people are across the ward. But I think it's really important to find a transformational way to engage with citizens by building or utilizing a platform centered around communities to access information, ask questions, give feedback. We should incentivize communities to use the engagement tool whenever they feel like their voice needs to be heard, and then really just rely on the data sets to make the best decision and move forward with that. And people are saying, well, it might be tough, and we're never gonna have a platform to do that in a city of 1.3 million people. But we saw an incredible transition this year to online learning throughout Canada, and especially in the elementary school. So if the CBE can teach elementary students how to learn online and things like that, then I believe that we can definitely find a better way to engage with our communities than hosting a one night only information session. So I'd like to champion something like that if I'm elected to council, a better way to engage people digitally, not phasing out the information sessions, obviously still just going out into where the people are and engaging person to person. But I think we're at a point where we need to really think digitally, and it's just that time has come to transform the way that we do engage with citizens.
Thank you, Derek. And since this is your question, Ted, we'll finish with you.
Great. Well, I want to start this off by reminding everybody what an amazing staff we have working for the city. I know that the communications department is doing their level best. They take pride in their work and they're very good at it. But let's face it, when we use something like the guidebook as an example, that is a tough sell. It is not a sexy topic, and people are busy and they have full lives, and bringing them to the table is very, very difficult. So when I talk about engagement and the need to improve it, it's certainly not an indictment of them. But what occurs to me with that, or a really great microcosm to explain what's been going on, is the Richmond Green situation. So the city, as from my estimation, is famous for presenting a solution to a problem nobody knows we have. Now, objectively, Richmond Green is a dog's breakfast of a park. It ain't great. It needs work, absolutely. But instead of establishing the problem, and then working with the community to offer solutions. A solution was brought to the table to a problem nobody really knew they had. And unfortunately, the trust that Lana spoke of was eroded by members of the Rutland Community Association, Rutland Park Community Association, finding surveyors there working on a land disposition before they knew what was going on and what was in the minds of the city. Now, had the city taken a different approach and approached the surrounding community associations and say, we have a problem. Our regional parks are important, and we've got one right here in smack dab in the middle of the city, but it is needing work. We're folding in an outdated golf course. Some of the amenities are run down. What we're going to do is we're going to come up with some possible solutions and offer them to you for us to then engage on. Had they done that, trust would have been retained, and I think there would have been a lot more openness to some of the creative solutions that the city is trying to provide. And so ultimately, I think we need to fundamentally change the way we approach our engagement by establishing the problem before the solution. And functionally from there, I think a lot of the good things have started by Councillor Gondek's recommendation and motion of rising back in May, that is going to ensure that people going forward after the pandemic can join public hearings remotely rather than in person. So we need to democratize this. We've got community associations, some which are over-resourced and some which are under-resourced. And that shows an imbalance in the public engagement. If we can level that playing field, go to where people are, provide technological opportunities for people to engage, I think between those two things, it would absolutely change the entire situation.
Thank you, Ted. So in the interest of time, because I want to make sure we get to everyone, I think let's move just forward to Paul's question, and then we'll catch some of my rapid fire the other way. So Paul's question, and the first to answer will be Gerbier, followed by Ted. The question is, what are your thoughts on the regional parks policy at the City of Calgary? And I will remind you to keep your answers perhaps a tad on the short side, but complete, because, you know, people are hanging in there to hear it. So the question again, what are your thoughts on the regional parks policy at the City of Calgary? Gerbier, you're up first.
Oh, damn, I had to go first on this one, eh? So I couldn't, to be honest, I couldn't find the policy that you're referring to, but I'll speak to parks in general. And I see in the document that the Richmond Green golf course thing was on there as well. So we can even touch on that. And sort of, I've heard a lot of times, you know, sort of now running for public office, a lot of people ask actually, what's a city's business in operating golf courses? And, you know, obviously with budget cuts, we saw that the Richmond Green golf course got cut and ceased operation. You know, a lot of time, you know, with the golf courses, whether it be a McCall or Shaganappi or in the case of this one, you know, they're actually utility properties that serves utility. You know, I believe this one has large water cisterns below it, and they used the open space to create an amenity that may generate some revenue. And I believe I read somewhere that it's by closing that golf course, they're saving about $150,000 annually in operational costs. But parks as a whole, you know, I think one thing the pandemic has taught us is the importance of these spaces. You know, when we couldn't congregate with our friends and our family and our neighbors, you know, we really relied on these spaces to go and, you know, to get a break and kind of be outside and enjoy. So, you know, I should say that these spaces, we need to continue to invest and improve in these spaces. You know, I think we need to continue to protect them as our city continues to grow and redevelop. We have to be sure that we are protecting and preserving our parks and green spaces so that all Calgarians can enjoy, you know, for generations to come. So I know the city recently announced funding for a few recreational projects throughout the city. Again, continuing its investment in recreation. So I think that's a great investment. And again, we have to continue to make that. Again, really tied to the first question that we started with today, with what Lana had said. You know, having a socially connected community leading to a thriving economy, this relates really well. You absolutely need to do it because, again, we are here forever. We are the municipality, we are the government, and we need to continue to ensure that these spaces are upkept, they're available for all to enjoy, again, for generations to come. So that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Kabir. Let's move over to Ted, followed by Courtney.
Well, Paul, I think this is a great question. You know, I think this is a question that's really a hot topic right now because of what's happening in Richmond Green. And so I think the heart of the matter, I don't think a single one of us is going to come out against parks. I'm just going to take a guess there. I think everybody's for parks, but something that's happening here is the notion of accelerating the improvement of the park by selling off a portion of it to raise funds and move it to the top of the list. And I like so many of the people I'm talking to, have a real problem with that. There is a plan put forward, which if everything goes according to plan, there will be a net increase in park space available. But the unfortunate part is they are doing this in phases, and in phase one, 5 acres of land with 2 ball diamonds is going to be sold off, and that those funds will then fund some improvements to another portion of the park with a single ball diamond being replaced. But we're told that in subsequent phases, the golf course is going to be folded into the larger park, and some streets and parks land, OWCB, or OWC, I believe is what the acronym is for the land, which are contaminated and need remediation, are going to be folded in. And once all that happens, indeed, there will be a net increase of park space. But they haven't attached timelines to this. And so it's yet another trust us. In the long run, you'll get a bigger park. But what is guaranteed is that a portion of the park is going to be sold off. And what the people of Rutland Park would want me to say at this point is to point out something that they've been saying loud and long. What precedents does this set for other parks, other regional parks in Calgary? And I think it's highly problematic. I on the one hand, really like a progressive approach to improving what could be a jewel of the community, but without any guarantees and with this trust us aspect about future phases, it becomes very shaky indeed.
Thank you, Ted. Over to you, Courtney.
Thanks. So yeah, I just want to clarify that it's not just the golf course, it's all of Richmond Green. And so I want to say this is one of those situations where there are ward specific issues, but that all councillors get a say in the future of our city, because as Ted mentions, it does set some precedent. So when I look at it as the outsider, as not the person in, I generally see that the city holds a great deal of land that is underutilized or not to its highest and best use. So I see an opportunity at Richmond Green, and now I don't know all the details. And yes, I think to Ted's point, we need to look at the phasing, the timing, the investment to create some certainty. Are we ever going to have 100%? No. I mean, this is the green line too. There is no always 100% certainty. But I see an opportunity to create a space to help us meet our density goals, to help provide living, housing, potentially for a whole bunch of people to be proximal to a regional park. Also, like 33rd is a very good transit corridor. So I actually see some of the opportunities in the projects that we also need to be discussing. And I think there are other opportunities similarly that the city holds onto land. And when we talk about needing tax uplift and tax revenue and making sure that we are a thriving city, the city not, using land to our highest and best use, in my mind right now, looks like a really good option. And I think, unfortunately, Richmond Green is that first step. for this rethinking, this innovation that we're looking at the city level. But I'll go back to, Ted said it 2 questions ago. They came with the solution. They didn't talk about the problem. And so we need to be having those conversations up front as well.
Thank you, Courtney. Over to you, Derek.
You know what? My family's just coming home right now, and the dogs are going crazy. Can you skip me for one round here, or one person? Is there one more person to go?
Yeah, absolutely. We can certainly move over to Lana. How you doing in the heat? You ready?
I feel like I'm living an episode of the Golden Girls.
You and me both, girl.
All I'm going to say is this: much like my colleague Gerbir, I took a journey through Google and was unable to find regional parks policy City of Calgary. Earlier, Jen, I had made the comment that I think there's an issue, a problem with credibility when city councillors speak about things that they don't know or don't understand. To the degree required. So I would simply say, as it relates to Richmond specifically and the regional parks policy, I would say that my approach to this issue would be to consult with my constituents. I think to engage people who have expertise on the matter specifically. And to consider my mandate. I think earlier I said, I think there are some things that are good for the city as a whole and a ward that are ward specific. I would certainly weigh the two and try and come to an informed decision in that regard. I think if I'm pivoting it back to the people of Ward 6, I believe that every boy and girl in Calgary should have access to a wonderful green space to go play, to grow, to be healthy, to be well, and to enjoy with their family. And I think that should be consistent regardless of which ward they live in and which part of a ward they live in. I've been very clear in my mandate to build strong, inclusive communities. So as Ted said, obviously, no one's going to argue against accessible parks for all, and I would be no exception to that. So certainly green space and accessible public spaces to gather has come up when I've engaged folks from across the ward. So it is a priority for me as it relates to this policy specifically. I think I would put a pin in it and say I need way more information in order to give a thoughtful response, and I would happily take responsibility for that if elected to council.
Thank you, Lana. Are you ready, Derek, or do you need some more time?
All's quiet on the Western Front right now. I didn't actually get the updated question until just now when you posted it in the chat. So I'm a little bit behind on the Richmond Green Golf Course situation there. But, when it comes to public parks, I think we all agree that they're really important for our mental health and wellness, and our city is blessed with a number of amazing green spaces and parks in which we've all, I'm sure, used the frequented the past 15 months. But, as our city grows and our communities evolve, there should be an effort to maximize green spaces and urban forests and recreational areas all over the city. And speaking more to Ward 7, kind of like Lana did for Ward 6 there, I believe, a downtown commercial core could use a whole bunch more green spaces. And I believe that part of our transformation of downtown should be reclaiming some of that concrete jungle back into a naturalized area or public park. And we think about sports fields across the city. I mean, you talked about Richmond Green putting a baseball, is it baseball diamonds there? I mean, have we done the appropriate engagements here? Are baseball diamonds the most important thing for that community to go into that park? I mean, could we use other sports to go there as well? I mean, it comes back to using that engagement and using the data to make informed decisions. But I think that's in respect to Ward 7, I think we could do a better job of having more public parks. And if some of those buildings that are sitting vacant, in the next 5 or 10 years, if they're still vacant, I'm 100% in favor of tearing them down and putting parks there, 100%. So that's my 2 cents on the public parks policy. I did read through the 122 page, or I brisked through the whole policy online when I did find it, the open spaces thing, but I wasn't exactly sure where the question landed. So I'm glad that we kind of narrowed it down to Richmond Green there for you guys.
Well, thank you for your due diligence and your question answering. Thank you very much. All right, Paul, this was your question, so off and over to you.
Hey, great. And first of all, my apologies to all of you. I added my preface to that question earlier this evening, and so I should have jumped in, Gerber, and said, "Whoa, hold on, it's got a bit of a preface." And So I feel that you know, I'm feeling somewhat guilty that question might have been a little unfair, and I apologize for that. But you know, we've spoken about this issue a couple of times, and it really has to do with engagement. And I think, Ted, you know, you've recognized and given the nod to the fact that this process was a little backwards. You said something to the effect of, you know, you said something about a problem before the solution. And you know, I've consistently said that you know, to your point, the point you were making, that there's a solution looking for a problem. And I'm sorry I got that backwards with what you said, Ted, but there seems to be a solution looking for a problem. And so rather than approaching the communities and discussing what might be appropriate for that space, the city actually, it went back to previous to the surveyor showing up. It was actually delisting the park from the city's parks list, so that they could address, that they could create this solution before we knew there was a problem. And so I'm really disappointed with this. There's a whole bunch of issues around the OWC, the Outdoor Works Center, being polluted, and that was supposed to be the original density hub in that park. But really what it comes down to, with all the machinations, I think the city once again has broken the trust of the constituents when they've approached a major park in this fashion. If they can do this to Richmond Greens, they can do it to the North Hill Park. You name any number of parks in the city that they can just delist from the registry and then sell pieces of land. And I think there's lots of pieces of land that are available for development. Courtney, you know, if there was a point in this conversation where it might be a little contentious, I think there is so much land available that there is no need to touch city parks. And this is a classic example of the city getting ahead of and not realizing that there is a ton of city-owned land that is not parks that can be developed. And so I think it's disingenuous, and I'm really quite unhappy about what the city has done with that park. And I would caution all of you that if they can do it with Richmond, they can do it with parks in your area. So there you go. That's probably the most emotional question for me this evening was just how they've approached that. And Ted, you got some of those thoughts out as well, and I think we're both on the same page there.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for your great answers. I'm going to ask Courtney's question now, and then we'll finish with one last rapid fire question before we bounce you into breakout rooms and the real fun begins. Courtney's question is, we're in the midst of a heat wave. What climate resiliency strategies do you want to see Calgary continue or introduce? And the first to answer that question will be Lana.
Well, this is one of the easier questions for me to answer. My partner is actually a climate scientist, soon to be a PhD holder, so keep it up, you're almost done. But fundamentally, when we have discussions about climate resilience, the number one piece of feedback that I have been furnished with is listen to scientists. Now, I know that might seem like an oversimplification, but I think it bears repeating, given that we're in a moment in time where we have seen politicians at times eclipse the recommendations of those who have bona fide expertise in matters such as climate or health or education. So I think we need to be taking the lead of those who are actually experts on climate science. And if elected to City Council, with due respect to everybody on the call, I'm going to be taking my lead, once again, using an evidence-based decision-making approach versus plans put forth by those who are working from something others than having expertise on one of the most critically important issues of our time. In terms of what's been put forth thus far, I think in terms of what we can influence at the municipal level, I do think transportation is a really big issue, and I think inclusive transportation is a really big issue. It seems like a couple of hours ago we started by talking about the Green Line, but I really do think that mass transit and exploring ways for people to travel around our city without having to own a car are really, really important. And I know that that might seem like an unimaginable future to those of us on the call, but I would say that younger generations have been clear. This is an existential crisis. And one of the things on my website is the difference that makes the difference. I think one of the biggest difference makers around climate resilience is inclusive transportation and supporting people in navigating our city in ways that they haven't necessarily in the past. So that would be my take on it. And yeah, I'm really pleased to see this question, and certainly on a day like today, it's a very timely one. So if ever there was a time to act, it's certainly now.
Thank you, Lana. Over to you, Derek, followed by Paul.
Thanks. So good question. I think Calgary really needs to get serious about solar and wind. I mean, we are one of the sunniest and windiest cities in all of Canada. And whenever possible, the city needs to encourage and incentivize alternative, renewable, sustainable power into our grid. And I know it's not as easy as just slapping up a solar panel and calling it a day, but when we're digging up utilities, when we're re-envisioning communities, when we're evolving communities, when we're creating new communities, I think that needs to be a focus on renewables. And there's another thing I know that I would like to see Calgary transition towards, and I was thinking about bringing this into kind of our green spaces question we had before, but I thought I'd leave it for this one, is having green living roofs on our public buildings across the city, including our +15 rooftops there. Taking that natural environment grass, the flowers, and put them on tops of the buildings where they once would have grown naturally. I mean, it's a way of reducing the building's carbon footprint, reduces the urban heat island effect, and it brings back the birds and the bees back to the areas that were not suitable because of urbanization. So I think if we were to move into the next, era that we're moving into, I know Courtney talked about it being our new event center, being a green building. I mean, heck, how cool would it be to have an urban garden on top of that, or have some bee farms on top of that? And I think it's really important to really think outside the box. I mean, it's not so much outside the box thinking anymore, but think towards the future when we're building our communities out into suburban, and when we're renovating the inner city.
Thank you, Derek. Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I guess let's start with some of the construction that's going on in the city here. So, when you're talking about what are some of the client resiliency strategies, the city is asking the building community to become more forward thinking. And they don't have to ask for very long, because a lot of the developers understand that when you build a LEED Gold building or a climate friendly building, there's payback to the developer and the owner of that building. So there's a lot of these programs going on already. Certainly in the home building industry, which I'm quite familiar with, there's questionnaires that we have to fill out when we apply for a development permit that have to do with climate resiliency questions. So the city is already moving in that direction, and it's got some good programs in place. And what's nice, what I'm happy to see is the developers and builders are already moving in that direction. The question becomes, at what cost? So we can build a net zero home for anybody today, but do you want to pay the extra $100,000? And generally, we're finding that as we move forward with these additional costs, that the builder has to pass on somehow. They have to be paid for. The problem is that the majority of people don't want those buildings. They don't want to pay the extra price. So I think we've got some good projects. We've got some good ideas. We're moving in the right direction, but it's going to take some time. it's nice to say that it'd be great to have a Tesla powered, an EV car in every garage. Everybody would like that. But you've got to get the power from somewhere. Is it nuclear? Is it wind? Is it coal? Is it gas? And then you've got to get that actually to the house. And what we know right now is that Calgary's electric grid is not at all capable of handling any capacity in terms of electric charging of cars. So this is a generational thing. And we're certainly on the cusp, and we're certainly headed there, which is great. But to expect everybody to be driving an electric car right away is going to be a little tough because the city's infrastructure grid does not at all support it. So I think the city's doing some great stuff. I think we're headed in the right direction. Our partners over at NMAX are headed in the right direction, but it's going to take some time. And I think we have to be smart about how we do that transition, understanding that it can't happen in a couple of years. It's going to take 10 years. It's going to take 15 years to put in place all that infrastructure that gets us to the goal that we want. So it's nice to see we're headed in the right direction, and I look forward to that continuing.
Ted, your thoughts?
Well, with all due respect to Paul, I don't believe we have time. I think this is, we are in the middle of a stretch of days that are unprecedented in Calgary. What should be our rainiest season is right now our hottest season. This is an existential threat to humanity, and we need more urgency to it. We don't have time to wait. We need to act now. And I do not trust the market to drive those changes, at least not until consumer demand supports it. What we need to do to level the playing field for the developers is legislate that they build net zero now. We do have a climate resilience strategy. It's got a couple of aspects, a mitigation action plan to reduce emissions, an adaptation action plan to manage risks. The plan's there, but here's the problem. It calls for an 80% reduction in citywide emissions below 2005 levels by 2050. We are fiddling while Rome is burning, and we are going to try and clean things up. By the time junior high school students are as old as I am, which is old as dirt, by the way, it's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. We are fiddling while Rome's burning. We've got to do everything we can do now. And I'm not going to relitigate the guidebook, but isn't that an opportunity to sort of, while we're revisiting planning, could we not make statutory some of these changes to drive these changes faster than the market will do it itself?
Thank you, Ted. Gerbier.
Thank you. What passion, Ted, in your response, and thank you for sharing that. And, this is a great question. And, clearly climate change is real. Since, if I recall last 10 years living in the city, summers have generally gotten hotter and the winters have gotten milder for the most part. So I do feel as well, like Lana said, that we should listen to people who know a lot more about this than we do, and understand and see the wave that the world's kind of going on and sort of becoming more climate resilient and moving in the right direction with this. But we also have to understand our roles as municipal councillors and what we actually do. And our job is to set policy and set the tone and set the direction. And if we feel this is an important thing that the city needs to address as a part of its operations and the services that it delivers, it really starts with policy making and where this lands and how, again, everything that we do, how our administration procures, or how we put buses on the road, or how we repave roads, or whatever it is that we do, and all the other services that we deliver. So I think we as a council need to continue to push and put more emphasis on climate resiliency. But some of the things that come to mind for me, things that we can do to kind of really move forward, I should say, are things like urban canopy and trees, and building our urban forests. In a week like today, where it's unbearable to be outside, having trees and having more of an urban canopy does help in lowering temperature at the street level. right? So things like that, putting emphasis on that this is a requirement when you are developing or redeveloping in the city. You know, we started this conversation with the Green Line project. You know, how do you reduce greenhouse gases? Well, you take some cars off the road and you put them in one centralized transportation method. And by that, you're also doing so many other secondary benefits, you know, with providing affordable transportation and all that kind of thing as well. So, you know, there are many things that we can do as a city. You know, another one that was talked about by Paul was, you know, sort of more sustainable building products and, you know, LEED certification and, you know, building buildings that, you know, are built to sort of sustain big weather swings, whether it be in cold or hot. So, you know, again, these things come at a cost. And, you know, I don't really disagree too much with Paul. And, you know, in the sense that, is it important? Yes. Do we have to start paying attention and start doing our part now? Absolutely. But we also have to understand how much the market can bear. So, you know, you don't want to go so far in the sense that you're making something unsustainable or unreasonable to develop and build. But making, you know, strides in the right direction, whether it be advances in the building code, which is under provincial jurisdiction and legislation, you know, making incremental changes that in which the industry can then catch up and sort of make the final cost to the end buyer or user sustainable. It's all part of one big equation. But again, sorry, I'm kind of talking a bit of a circle, but at the end of the day, I feel that it starts at the top, and if we move too fast, you might turn people off and things may not work in the way we envisioned. We have to continue to make investments and decisions that also address climate change and resiliency. So thank you for the question, Courtney.
Speaking of Courtney, that brings us all the way up to you. This was your question. What say you?
All right. Thanks everyone for their answers. And I think it's a really great kind of like broad capture that it takes all parties participating to move us forward. Sorry, the one cough I have. So I specifically want to address like what can the city do? So I think it's education through leadership. So how many people know that the federal government just put out like a whole bunch of grants and through the carbon tax? Are we sharing that knowledge with our citizens? I think when we look at the city level, we ask citizens to do things and we don't replicate. So we ask citizens to leave their lawns 3 inches long. How much do we mow? How much do we mow grass that is not suited for our climate? So to me, looking at a better biodiversity strategy, so if we're not mowing, we don't have emissions. Those are concrete things that we can be doing. I think about our plantings. How much water are we using? So climate is 100% affecting our water supply, and that it is projected, and you can find this data on the city website. It is projected that we will be in water crisis like in the very near future, like by 2036, if our population grows and the rate of climate change declines. So we need to address those issues. So are we planting a ton of annuals that we're watering, or can we do more perennials and hardy perennials and then show that as leadership to our citizens? I will piggyback off Lana and saying our active network, our active transportation network, transit, walking, biking, scooting, those are all things that we need to show as leadership in, as we say to Calgarians, we value a healthy planet. So those are a couple of my ideas. Obviously, programs to incent people to do retrofits, I think are great. I think we need to understand that retrofit programs are biased towards people who have the means to afford it in the first place. So we need to also explore what we can build at the neighborhood level for people to take advantage of and buy into. So it's also really important for that. And Lana, I'm going to say the response to that is we get to do it in the breakout rooms for the last 15 minutes. I'll talk to you about it any day.
Great answers all around. I think Courtney's been listening to my podcast, talking a lot about the environment lately, and lots of crossover there. So thank you all for your answers. I have one final question for you before I break you all out, and it's this. Calgarians deserve candidates who run relevant, meaningful campaigns to earn the vote of their constituents. It's up to all of us to do right by our voters and to give them a runoff that's built on good political ideas and selling those ideas to the public. When you look back at the end of your campaign in October, what 3 words do you hope will have defined your campaign? Courtney says celebration, commonality, conversation. Derek, nope, that's Paul, says open, honest, and hold up your sheet a little bit more, and engagement. Ted says told the truth. Gerbier says left 17 all out there. Left it all out there. Sorry. I was like, what? 17? Left it all out there, says Gerbier. Derek says honest, future, community. Lana says credible, community, people first. Well, let's hope that that's the way it plays out in each of your wards. We have a small group today, but we're still going to break out. So here's how your breakout rooms will go. If you are in Ward 3 and would like to talk to Gerbier, you're headed to room number 1, and you can simply go to the bottom of your Zoom, and there's an opportunity to break out there. If you are in Ward 6 and would like to have a conversation with Lana, you're headed to room 2. Ward 7 folks for Derek can go to room 3. Ted for Ward 8 can go to 4. Paul for Ward 8 can go to 5. Courtney in Ward 11 has room number 6. And if you'd like me to hear how I'm going to take Jason Kenney's job, you can stay with me in the main breakout room.